Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie, hope you're having an amazing day. You see what happens when you subscribe, you get a bonus greeting on every single episode. On this episode, we talk to Karin Hurt and David Dye, authors of Courageous Cultures and Powerful Phrases for Workplace Conflict. These guys are phenomenal. They're great speakers. They're keynote speakers. They're leadership experts. And they've written some really cool books. I love this book, Courageous Cultures, and their new book, which I just ordered, is phenomenal. And so we talk a lot about how we can practically avoid conflicts in the organization. We talk through these GOAT phrases, greatest of all time phrases, to drive more connection and clarity and commitment for whatever we're working on. And yeah, I think you guys are really going to love them. So enjoy.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Well, super excited to get you guys on. I love this book, of course, and you guys have a new book coming out. So I'd love to just kind of dive right in to the new book, the impetus behind writing it, what some of the big takeaways have been. It's gotten a lot of great feedback from what I've seen already. I just ordered it today. So yeah. So what, this book, phenomenal. The next, this book that we're talking about now, it's kind of an extension of it. It's kind of like the black belt version of this in some ways. So I just want to kind of talk about what the impetus was and what the catalyst was to kind of take this next step.
Our new book is Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict, What to Say Next to De-Stress the Workday, Build Collaboration, and Calm Difficult Customers. And, why did we write this book? Because we were working with clients, and as you're holding up Courageous Cultures, we're working with clients all over the world, and we were thinking, it seems like there's more conflict than before the pandemic, even just more than a couple of years ago. So what is going on? Is that true? And as you know, we don't do anything without doing some research behind it, because that's what our gut said. But so we had the World Workplace Conflict and Collaboration Survey, and we asked 5,000 participants all over the world, 45 countries, are you experiencing more conflict? And if so, what's going on? And we also asked them to think about a significant workplace conflict that they had in the past, and what advice would they give their former selves if they were faced with that conflict again? And so, David, do you want to share a little bit about the findings?
Yeah. And so that, really the impetus for us to write that was the very first question: are you experiencing more or less conflict at work? 70% of people said they're experiencing more, significantly more conflict at work than over the previous years.
So your gut was right.
Gut was right. And what's interesting, I was like, okay, let's look at the other data. That 30% that said they're experiencing less, fully half of those people said the reason they're experiencing less is because they've escaped a toxic situation, they left that job, or now they're working remotely and they're just not interacting with people. Which, okay, all of those, it's interesting because all of those are escape valves, and they might be good for that person in terms of they're having a more peaceful existence, and good for that. But from a team organizational productivity perspective, what's lost in all of that? You're losing the productive conflict, the collaboration, the creativity, the problem solving. And so we really wanted to equip people with super practical ways to move from, the kind of conflict that we all go, I don't want that destructive conflict, to healthy, productive conflict, which another word for that is collaboration. And so how do we move and how do we shift into that productive mode and make conflict something that is not something we have to avoid, but something that we can actually engage in really skillfully and get some great outcomes?
So I have not read the book yet. As you know, I just ordered it. So some of these questions might be stupid, but we have an hour, so you're going to get some stupid questions in here. Did you dive into why that conflict has increased? Like why, you kind of had these interactions, you started to kind of have this gut feeling, you did some, scientific research, got some data back, confirmed it. What's the cause of it?
Sure thing. Yeah. And not a dumb question at all. In fact, that's the next question we asked in the survey. And we actually did we started with qualitative and then grouped it and then let people choose, okay, of all of the sources of conflict and what's contributing to it, let people choose up to 3. And so the numbers don't add up to 100% as I share these, but 27% of folks said that it's a major contributing factor, overwhelm, burnout, understaffing. Which I don't think comes as a surprise to any of us. And the data continues along that trend, even years after the pandemic's over. Equivalent with that, 27% said poor management practices. And before we get down on our managers, obviously we're committed to human-centered leadership management and equipping leaders and managers with those tools. The reality is that managers today are facing some unprecedented challenges that haven't occurred really before, where they're being asked to do things that are new on top of all of the work of accomplishing the results, the KPIs, and so forth. And whether that's the level of support with one of the next causes, 21% said mental health, anxiety, things like that contributing to conflict that managers are being asked to deal with. The whole hybrid remote, all of those elements of work that are newer to people, and so many organizations are still struggling to figure out. And so that's why you see like Gallup saying that for the first time in history, managers are more disengaged than the people they're leading, which that's a scary stat. And so those contributing factors, overwhelm, burnout, poor management practices, and then the mental health, anxiety things, those are the top three that came out. Right behind them, some of the polarization, less tolerance, understanding for others, 20%, and then others citing a less motivated workforce. So, and there's an older generation. These people just don't want to work. We saw a lot of that, some generational differences as well.
So on that last point, I saw this Twitter thread that had like literally 50 tweets on it. And every single one was a picture from the newspaper of like the older generation complaining about the most recent generation, and it was going back to the 20s. So it was like every 5 years, the older generation is like, these young folks, they don't know what they're doing. I mean, it's so funny. It's like a perpetual wave just hitting
every single generation. Yeah, we've been doing this work long enough. We certainly see that.
So my brother shared with me this framework about conflict that I found, it was many years ago, and I've just found it to be very valuable. And it's sort of making the distinction between personal conflict and task conflict. And one is unhealthy and one is healthy. One is about, I don't like you, you don't like me, and we're just kind of, like my kids maybe arguing over who has to clean the counters versus us kind of organically, whatever, cleanly debating what the best course of action is without those personal feelings involved. Do you find, did that sort of distinction come into play in any of your research? And why is it so hard for us to make that distinction? Because sometimes a conflict just feels like a conflict when one might be healthy and one might not be,
Yeah, so it's interesting. We did see mostly conflict that felt interpersonal.
Yeah.
But there were policy decisions that came up a lot. So now everybody's saying we have to come back to work, and now we have conflict because I disagree with that. So that is a little more task related.
Sure,
but
yeah.
But they're interpreting that as negative. You don't have my best interest at heart, which actually made it more personal. So we really, what we saw was really 4 dimensions of productive conflict. And so are we connected as human beings? So, do you have that human connection? And are we connected before we're in a conflict?
Yeah.
Right. And are we able to connect in the conversation? Clarity, do we have a shared understanding of success? Do we agree on what success looks like? And clear expectations. So much conflict comes from expectation violations. Curiosity, are we genuinely interested in one another's perspectives and what's possible? Because it is impossible to be furious and genuinely curious at the same time. Right? And then commitment, do we have a shared agreement? And, so if you've ever been in one, and it's almost Groundhog's Day, one of those Groundhog Day conflicts, right, that you think we've resolved it. And then here we are again having the same argument. It's usually because we haven't moved to some kind of a closure and a shared agreement. And so that I love that model of, is it task? Is it people? And I think it's a little more complicated than that too,
Totally.
Right? And
Totally.
As you dive into these dimensions.
Yeah, that connection thing is a big deal, right? Because if I don't have a connection with you, then you're just like an automaton, and I'm a working automaton, you're a working automaton. We both have jobs to get done. But if we have that connection, then there's more empathy involved, and there's more grace, right? Like there's maybe a more of an assumption that the person has my best interest at heart. And maybe that's the core of every conflict, where you feel like the person on the other side just, I mean, this is stupid, I guess, but like they're going against you. They're going against your best interest, and we feel kind of threatened. And I found in my own company, in my own life, it seems like 90%, to your point, of the conflicts are due to some kind of a miscommunication. Some kind of expectations are misaligned, or someone said something and, we all have this negativity bias and we fill in all the blanks that we don't know with usually something negative. It's usually not even accurate. So that opens up a lot of opportunity for conflict to happen. Again, I'm just kind of thinking through it, especially in this environment where everyone's so disjointed,
Yes.
And that thing you said about the managers being more disengaged for the first time in history is wild. And, as I was thinking through it when you were talking, at some level, we've all been just sort of pushed into the pool, like this new normal. Nobody took a class on how to manage remotely. You just kind of figure it out. So you have all these people kind of reinventing all these wheels across the entire economy. And in doing that, there's a lot of trial and error, and more error than success probably. So that, I think, contributes to a lot of the apathy that you kind of talked about. You kind of talked about these ways that people are dealing with the conflict are kind of in unhealthy ways. It's not like an above the line, hey, let's hammer this thing out. It's more like, I'm just going to hit the eject button or the escape valve, as you called it, and just kind of not engage, which then leads to, that disengagement is a real headwind for an organization. So how do you talk to me about this sort of apathy concept and how, the potential contributions that people could be making are not being made as a result of all these conflicts,
Yeah, your analysis is so spot on there, Nick. Now, and the interesting thing is that all of those problems that you just diagnosed are the opportunities to move through it. So and I love what you said there, we so often interpret the worst possible interpretations of whatever's going on, when in reality, if I knew what your interests were, then maybe I could have them at heart. So, just in terms of building trust. So when we're diagnosing and getting into this, as Karin said, those 4 dimensions, we can invest in all of those before we're ever in a conflict.
Yeah, right.
I can get to know my teammates, get to know my manager, and vice versa as a human being, so that we see each other beyond just the role that we play. And we can do that before we're in a conflict. But when we're in the middle of a conflict and we can feel it starting to heat up, we can still start there. And one of the places in the book that we recommend everybody start in powerful phrases for dealing with workplace conflict is with the GOATs. And these are the greatest of all time powerful phrases for us. And we call these the 12 greatest of all time because they're so applicable in so many different ways. So each of the dimensions have a couple of them. So if we're talking about establishing connection, one of the easiest ways to do that is starting the conversation. Hey, listen, I really care about, and then what is it that we really care about? Hey, listen, I really care about our working relationship. I really care about the success of our team. I really care about the success of this project or our department, whatever it is that we're doing. And I'm confident we can figure something out here. So I can start with what I care about. Another way to connect with somebody is just by asking them, tell me more. Whatever they're doing, whatever they're saying, they're amped up, they're frustrated, everything that's going on, and tell me more. So that I can thoroughly understand. And just that desire to actually hear what somebody's saying, again, sincerely spoken, it's not just a tactic, can start to create that connection and start to ease some of that filling in the blanks in all the negative ways.
And what do you think is happening? What's the psychology that's happening with those two questions? I call the person that I'm talking to the adversary, okay? So maybe I'm a conflict guy, I don't know. But like, what's happening, do you think, in that other person when you ask them, or when you frame it out, reminding, hey, I really care about XYZ, or tell me more?
Yeah, there is a natural, as you said, there's a natural bias that not all, but most human beings have when we get into the middle of a conflict, which is, I'm assuming that other person, as you use the word adversary, that other person is out to stop me, get me, ruin me, or at least keep me from getting what I want. There's just this like natural bias there. So immediately acting in a way that's different than that and showing some concern for the human being and their thoughts, concerns, and issues immediately goes, oh, wait, it disrupts that pattern and says, okay, wait a minute, maybe there's a possibility here. And so tell me more. Oh, I was gearing up to really have to like force myself to be heard. And wait, now I'm not having to do that. They actually want to hear, oh, well, what else do I have to say? Yeah, it's this, and this. Well, tell me more. Oh, yeah, and this one other thing. Well, is there anything else? No, I think that's really what's on my mind. Whew. Now I'm heard. Now I'm not fighting to be heard. And so it opens the door to a productive conversation.
And it signals, to Karin's point, that curiosity. Again, if it's said sort of authentically or in a genuine way, and that on a subconscious level, I think is always a trigger to say like, okay, well, this is not a conflict conversation, right? It's like this person's like in a fact-finding mission, or there's pure curiosity there.
Yeah. When we talk about do you have my best interest at heart, a lot of times we assume that people should know what we want, and we
Yeah, exactly.
and that becomes the expectation violation. One of our favorite clarity goats is, what would a successful outcome do for you? And that takes what does success look like, which we all say in any project that we're working on, one level deeper, and it dives into motivation. So if you and I are working on a project, boss gives us something, it's due at the end of the week, and we know what success looks like for the project, but we take 5 minutes to also ask this question. Hey, Nick, what would a successful outcome do for you? And you say, Karin, I had to tell you, I have been working 70-hour weeks last couple of weeks. I am tired. What successful outcome will do for me is we are done by 5 o'clock on Friday. We're not going to let this one bleed into the weekend.
Right.
And so how can we work efficiently to make that happen? Now, if I don't know that that's your most important thing, and I haven't had those kinds of weeks, I might say this project is really important. I'm willing to sacrifice my weekend, but I don't know that about you. And then you ask me that, and I say, you know what a successful outcome would do for me? I don't think my boss understands how good I am at this stuff. He doesn't see my genius. So when we do the readout to the executive team on Monday morning and the really tricky questions come, can I take a couple of them? Give me the floor so that I can show that I was a really valuable contributor to this. And you're like, yeah, sure, you can take this. I don't want the difficult questions. Go for it, right? Now, we have just saved all that conflict that could have happened if we hadn't talked about that.
Yeah, and all the miscommunications that could kind of stem from that,
Yeah.
And I think it's a genius question, because I think the question I typically hear that's kind of a cousin to this question is what would a successful outcome look like? Which is a very different question, to your point, than what would this do for you? Right. One is talking about, kind of externally, I'm just picturing standing in an art gallery staring at a painting. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of a detached answer to the first question. The second question is very personal, and you can get down to those true pain points that are going to allow us to get, again, I get that it's a clarity question, to get that clarity about what's that person's reality like, and what are they trying to get out of this project?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right. So we've heard 3 of the goats so far. Yeah.
Yep.
What are some more? Yeah.
Yeah, no, let's go to curiosity. And this is, sometimes people ask hey, are you guys using these? You practice these? And we do. And this next one is one I really tried to focus on throughout 2024. And it's one of my favorites of the 12. I'm curious how this looks from your perspective. And as Karin mentioned, almost impossible neuroscientologically to be curious and furious at the same time. So when I feel myself amping up and I'm like, whoa, I'm getting frustrated. If I can get the words out, how does this look from your perspective? 2 things that are amazing. They're miraculous. They both happen. One, it eases my amygdala. I'm moving in my front brain. It eases my level of frustration because, now I'm in my thinking brain instead of my reactive brain. And then the second thing that is so important is that I learn something. Because no matter what my perspective is, no matter how much I understand an issue, I don't have a corner on all of the experiences, all the perspectives, all of the truth that there is on that subject. And so I'm going to learn something about the other person's perspective, which then makes me a better participant in any kind of solutioning, problem solving that we might do. So that is the first curiosity goat. I'm curious how this looks from
let me just give you an example how this played out for us the other day. Because a lot of times you think you don't even think you should have to be curious because it looks so obvious, right? What's going on. So David and I were facilitating a program. It was for a credit union association. It was called Executive Ready. So who was in the room were people who were ready now to be something that starts with a C. CHRO, CIO, CTO, CEO, right? And it was about 50 people in the room. This was going to be a long-term leadership development program. We're going to be hanging out with these guys for a while. So we started with connection and tapping into everybody's best practices. And we have this exercise that we use at a lot of our keynotes and a lot of programs like this, where we give everybody a card and some light bulb stickers, and they write down their best practice, and they go share their best practices with one another, and they vote with light bulbs. And
cool.
It's a nice ruckus of energy.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Except there's this one lady, and she's sitting there like this, totally closed in. The ruckus is happening around her. She is not moving.
Yeah, she's the rock in the river,
Right. They're like, what the heck is going on with this executive ready person, right? So David and I are like, she's not executive ready.
Yeah, she's in the wrong room. What's she doing here? Yeah.
Right. Should I call the CEO of this credit union? What are we going to do with her for 6 months? This is going to be painful. Right. So we have all these stories in our head. So we call a break and we go over to the woman and say, hey, how's this program going for you so far? What does this look like from your perspective? And she said, here's the thing. There was a long line outside of this building this morning, and I just got in that line. And then when the doors opened, I followed the group of people up. But I am a credit union member customer here to pay a bill.
Oh my gosh. She was not executive ready. You were right.
She really wasn't executive ready. She didn't want to be executive ready. She was in the wrong spot. But how much negative energy, and how much, time do we spend being ticked off, worried, making an alternative plan, right? We just needed to show curious.
Well, that's a threat, right? Like if the whole room is acting like that person, then your 6-month engagement is not going to go that well. So you start falling, to your point, back into that amygdala brain in that fight or flight mode, and you're running all these worst case scenarios. It's like, what if after lunch the entire room is like this? That's a panic mode,
Yes.
And bless her heart, why did she sit there for an hour? Because she didn't want to be disruptive. I'm like, oh.
Absolutely not executive ready. Yeah. But that's a good one. Again, trying to see it from their actual perspective, that asking that question depressurizes them. And then you get a glimpse of what's really going on inside their brain,
Yeah. And I just find it fascinating how often I am clueless about what that other person's perspective really was. Because like Karin said, it makes total sense to me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's like, I've seen this pattern before. I know exactly what this is. What are some more? I love that. These are great.
The next dimension, the fourth final dimension is commitment. And when we're talking about commitment, this is not like this act of willpower. Oh, I'm committed. What we're talking about here, and what happens a lot of times is we will have an intention, but we don't have a specific plan forward and a way to follow through. And so the commitment goats are really about creating that. And one of our favorites here is, we call this scheduling the finish. And so let's say that you and I are in this situation where we're trying to create a plan to share data. So we start the conversation. Hey, listen, I know my team's bugging you guys all the time. My intent for this conversation, I want to minimize the stress for both of us. We get the data. You're not getting pinged all the time. All right, what can we do? So we come up with a plan. All right, how about Tuesdays at noon, our request will be in for the week. Thursday at noon, we'll have the data back from your team. One and done. Easy for everybody. Great idea. Well, that's a nice intention, but it's not a plan yet. So then we get specific, like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to inform my team today. What are you going to do? You're going to inform your team at your team meeting tomorrow. We're going to do our first request next Tuesday. Great. Okay, so we've turned our intention into a specific. Now we need to schedule the finish. And what this phrase looks like is, let's schedule time to talk about this again and see how our solution's working. And so I say, hey, Nick, can we follow up on this next Friday? Let's give it 2 cycles. Let's see how this goes. How about 3 o'clock Friday? That work for you? You're like, yeah, let's do it. Okay, what happens in that? First, we have it on the calendar where we're going to be looking each other in the virtual or maybe real life eye to eye and saying, hey, did you do the thing? Yeah, I did the thing. Okay, cool. It increases the likelihood that we're going to follow through. If we do follow through, then high five, confetti. What did we learn? Let's keep doing it. Great. Celebrate success, build momentum. If we didn't do it, then we have a chance to talk about it. Because what often happens is we make this great agreement, and then our manager comes in with a fire drill from a customer complaint or some other department request or what have you. It disrupts our plan. And if we never talk about it again, trust erodes. But now we've got a built-in time to talk about it.
Well, because we talked about this, you promised it, it didn't happen for whatever reason. It just looks like a miscommitment.
Exactly.
When you don't know that context or whatever. Yeah.
And so now I can say, did you do the thing? No, I didn't do the thing either. Okay, neither did I. Well, what happened? Oh, our manager came with that. Yeah, okay. All right, well, let's talk. Is that a problem that's recurring that we need to solve for, or was that a one-off? And our best move here is let's just renew our commitment and try again next week.
Yeah.
And we've got a built-in time to have that conversation. So scheduling the finish, this is a powerful phrase because let's schedule time to talk about it again and see how it worked. Increases our likelihood of follow-through, gives us a chance to celebrate, gives us a chance to hold ourselves accountable or problem solve if it doesn't, and that builds trust.
Yeah, you're kind of building in that opportunity to either celebrate the win to keep that momentum going forward or to get the car back on the track if it's off the track or something.
Exactly.
I love that. Well, those goats are phenomenal. I'm going to start using them. You guys did talk about in the book how leaders tend to underestimate the amount of contribution that their team wants to make. And so this is a gap that happens in a lot of organizations, I think. And it's kind of like a tragic gap. And there's a corollary to this gap in the broad sort of culture discussion with ethics and compliance folks. So that's who listens to this podcast: legal, ethics and compliance, HR. And so what is happening on that side? And again, I'll bring this back in a second, but I think what's happening over there is we now have a workforce that cares more about an ethical culture than ever before, right? Like my grandfather was not considering how ethical is his organization. He was trying to get the job and, get the gold watch, right? So we have an increased sort of demand for ethical culture. And then we also have these departments within companies who are dedicated to building that culture, whether it's HR or it's ethics. It's trying to increase the quality of the organization by de-risking it. That's kind of the broad mandate, by changing behaviors inside the organization. And I think this is sort of like a meta conflict that's happening in the workforce. You guys are talking about one-to-one conflicts, and I think there's a lot of corollaries there. The thing that I'm struck with is like, we have all these people in our workplace that want a culture of integrity. They want it to be authentic. They want to bring their whole selves to work and not deal with all the BS, right, that comes along with a toxic culture. We have these departments that are dedicated to building that kind of a culture, yet the workforce doesn't trust these folks. And these folks haven't figured out a way to convey consistently to this workforce that, hey, we're here to help you, and we're not here to get you in trouble, but rather we're here to, hammer out the ills that you deal with, ethically or whatever. So how do we sort of like start to unpack that and start to plug, it's like we have a plug in the wall and we have a plug and we just have to sort of plug it in. And yet this thing persists. I've talked about this literally on every like webinar and podcast I've done for like maybe the last month, but the proportion of respondents, this is from the ethics, ECI, the Global Business and Ethics Report or whatever. The proportion of respondents who said, yes, I do live in a culture of integrity since 2013 has remained between 60 and 61%. Okay. So I don't know if that's expectations changing. I don't know what it is. But again, over the last 12 plus years, the proportion of respondents who would say that they live in an ethical culture has stayed totally flat. So how do we kind of start to unpack that? And how do we start to like bend the curve on that line? Because that's really what we're talking about. I would imagine most of the respondents, you said, I think 70% or something said that they're experiencing more conflict. I would expect most of those people feel that way. Most of those people feel that kind of disconnect, and they don't have that level of engagement. And so I'm trying to kind of tie this back to this concept of like contribution. It seems like companies have a misperception about what those employees value and what those employees are willing to provide to the organization. And I just want to kind of start to deconstruct a little bit, like how we can start to make those ends meet and how we can kind of fix this issue. You know what I'm saying? It's not because, again, I know I'm rambling through this, but like, it's not like it seems like we all have the same goal. It seems like everybody kind of has the same goal. You know what I'm saying? And yet there are all these disconnections still.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's so much in there. And I was like, I'm going to answer it this way. And now I'm going to answer it that way. So let me try with one piece of it, which David will know I'm very passionate about. And I'm sure he's probably got a different angle on this. And then I have yet another angle potentially. But one is one of the things, when you talk about contribution, a lot of what compliance and my very best friends are compliance officers, which is actually true, right? So I do hang out and have some really candid conversations with people in that kind of function. I also was in HR at Verizon, had a variety of roles for a decade of my 2 decades there. So I've been in that side of things. A lot of times people with really good intention doing a lot of these very vital programs are trying to do is make it feel safe. Like, let's create a safe environment that people can speak up, they can raise their hand, they don't have to feel like they're blowing a whistle, because it's just what people like us do. We have a very psychologically safe environment. Obviously, we wrote a book all about psychological safety, right? So we are huge believers in making that really practical. What we have found since writing that book, Courageous Cultures, that you held up at the beginning, is that psychological safety is important, but it is not sufficient. If you really want people speaking up, you also have to have strategic clarity of people understanding where you need input, right? So what we need, this is what compliance this is what unethical looks like. If you see something, say something around that. So not only is it safe, but here's what we're talking about when we see a problem. Or if you have an idea, this is where we're headed strategically. I've made it safe for you to speak up, but here's where I need an idea. I need ideas about how we can create, a better environmental, responsibility. Yeah, whatever it is that will make people feel like you really do care about their ideas. And so what we found, it's that intersection of psychological safety and strategic clarity, that is where you are having a culture where people are really, really free to speak up and share their ideas. And without that, you may have a lot of ideas. You may have people bringing you all kinds of little baby nitty things that are not really big compliance concerns, right? Your inbox is so filled. And this is what I hear from my friends who are chief compliance officers. Wow, I got to respond to all this little stuff. But meanwhile, I got these big things that I'm deeply concerned about, and helping people understand that, I think, makes a big difference.
So can we just kind of think through what those four different sort of circumstances can look like high psychological safety, low psychological safety, and then like low, what'd you call it? Strategic clarity, and then high strategic clarity.
Yes. So this is, I have a TEDx all about this, and we have a beautiful little.
So this should be an easy one for you.
Yeah. So, but if you've got both low psychological safety and low strategic clarity, you're not going to get anything. I mean, people are just holding down, buckling in, and trying to get through their day and not get fired, right? So negligible ideas. But if you've got the opposite, where not the opposite, but you've got high psychological safety. So I feel safe, but low strategic clarity. Okay, well, if you've got that, you're going to get lots and lots of wacky, off-base, dingling ideas and stuff that you can't really use because people feel super safe and they're just lobbing ideas and compliance concerns.
This? Yeah.
Yeah. But if you've got the high strategic clarity, people get it. They know where you need ideas. They know what a compliance issue looks like, but they have low psychological safety. You're going to have invisible ideas. People are going to have ideas, but everybody's going to be frustrated. The people are going to not feel safe, so they're frustrated. You're going to be frustrated because you're not getting those ideas. So what we're looking for is that sweet spot of more remarkable, usable ideas or more important compliance things being shared, which is at that intersection of high psychological safety and high strategic clarity.
Yeah, that's great. And I would bet that the low psychological safety, high strategic clarity environment probably breeds, just let me know what you think about this. It probably breeds a thought that like management are idiots. Because it's like, this is so clear to me. This is such an obvious idea. Why don't they see it? I'm not going to say anything about it. But like these people are freaking idiots, or they don't care, which they probably do care. They probably just don't know about it. I don't really find a lot of executives who just like don't care about the business. You know what I mean?
Of course, right.
Exactly. And I want to personalize this with. I'm thinking of a 31-year-old woman who I spoke with a couple weeks ago. She works for a sportswear company that makes like environmentally sustainable. Has a lot of ethics and integrity in the type of garments they're trying to produce, right?
Yep.
It's how they're founded. Their founders believe in that. It's in the ethics of the ethos of the whole business. And yet, to your point, she's incredibly frustrated because she doesn't think that they have integrity and that they're in alignment with their own values. Why? And this, I think, gets to the disconnect you're talking about. And yes, so sometimes she can think that those leaders are, as you said, idiots because they're not in alignment. Well, they would say they're in alignment. So where's the disconnect, right? It's that different view on what a successful outcome does. What does it mean for us to do? There's a lack of communication in that. And I think, getting to the question you were asking, how do we overcome those hurdles? I do think it is a person by person, relationship by relationship process. Even in large companies, there are the corporate statements that we make. But at the end of the day, nobody cares about your corporate statement. They want to see what you're doing.
Yeah, right.
And what is the behavior? What is the conversation we're having? Is my approach to ethics and compliance, gotcha? Or is it that I'm truly drawing out, what's your perspective on this? How do you see us being in alignment with our values? And so in this company, as we coach through and had the conversation, they're not asking their employees, hey, how do you see the integrity and values adherence throughout our organization? If they were to ask that, they would discover there are some places where they are not in the same level of alignment with their sustainable agriculture, all the things that they want to be, and that their employees have some good ideas about how they could get there. Now, there may be good reasons not to get there. There might be financially, it's really tough and this is a gray area and so forth. And so we're making a strategic call on this. But until you have the conversation, you can't know that and you can't build that trust. So those conversations have to happen in order to move us out of those other quadrants up into that fourth quadrant.
It seems like, leaders have like a big blind spot for that. And maybe I'm like telling you a little bit about myself, but I would imagine that the leaders at that company, for that 31-year-old woman you were talking about, to them, in their own mind, they're like, how would anybody question my integrity or my like allegiance to these values? In their mind, they probably have thousands of examples of where they've chosen the right path, or they could have, kind of compromised and they didn't. And I think, to something Karin said before, we kind of expect everyone to like know our intentions, to like, judge me by my intentions and I'm going to judge you by like what I see. That's kind of like a fallacy that like we all have. And I think when a leader is very confident that like he is a values forward person, or, I'm living out these values. I came up with the values. All of our manufacturing processes are, we're picking, responsibly sourced materials, and, we have strict controls over child labor, whatever those things are that go into a high integrity kind of manufacturing company that you described. I think sometimes they think it's like a foregone conclusion that like, how could anybody ever question this? And it's hard to like look at myself through your eyes or through your eyes. It's until you have that kind of conversation and you get that kind of perspective. And so there are all these mixed signals sent throughout an organization from leadership, I think, that indicate to people the extent to which that company or that leader is truly pursuing these ideals that, are behind the values and stuff like that. And so I'm just bringing this back to this comment you made at the beginning about managers being more disengaged. If managers are totally overwhelmed and they don't know how to manage in this new space, and they're falling into their backup style, which is the self-preservation mode, that's sending like myriad miscommunication potential messages out to like the entire workforce. So, middle managers are such a critical role in establishing a culture, right? Because the broad company culture is just the composition of all these other little cultures where those managers have like a disproportionate influence on the vibe on their team and so forth. So there's a knock-on effect, presumably, for like, it would probably boil down to like employee engagement. As like a crappy manager is in place, and as they're as they're feeling overwhelmed and they're sort of not engaging like maybe a generation before them has, has to be a knock-on effect to like employee engagement. And maybe that's kind of what we're seeing. And that opens up again a lot of opportunity for more conflict.
Yeah, it does. And then, the other angle I wanted to take on your earlier question was connection. When we talk about the 4 dimensions, I think when compliance is a hotline on the back of the bathroom stall, like see something, say something, that feels very cold and like that feels scary. And can I really trust it? And if it's recorded, what's actually going to happen? And some of the best programs that I have seen are where either the HR people or the compliance people or the frontline managers make it really feel like connected. Like I know my HR person as a human being. I'm actually proactively calling them and inviting them in before I get into trouble, right? And because I trust that I can have that confidential relationship. And when I was leading a large HR team, that was like my main thing. Like, don't be, I'm here from HR and I'm here to help get you into trouble. I am here from HR and I am your strategic partner in this, and you can trust me, and we're going to shut this door and we're just going to talk about, what's actually happening here. And when you can build that relationship, it makes all the difference in terms of, less conflict, because you're getting ahead of some of these conflicts.
Yeah. And it's persuading everybody that it's not this cold thing that it might look like
Yeah.
From the bathroom stall. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. When you look up from Instagram and you see that poster on the stall, um,
Now you are revealing a bit about yourself.
So I'd love to talk a little bit about like this concept of the power of the pause. Like, why is that so powerful? And how can we start integrating that into our conversations? The opposite of the power of the pause, I would imagine, is like interruption, maybe.
Yeah, when you talk about the power of the pause, I think there are several levels here. And so the first one is before you have a conversation with any other person, to pause and have the conversation with yourself. And what often happens in these situations, and so much of even what we've just been talking about, is all the conversations we are having that are imaginary conversations in our head. It's the executive saying, of course I'm doing all these things, don't they know? It's the employee going, what's wrong with them? And if I say anything, I'm going to get fired, and all of that. And I have been there. Like, one of my earliest leadership memories, there's a CEO I worked for. I'm a team leader, got a team of 3, puts on this marketing event, and I hated it. He wanted me to be super involved. And I thought, this thing lacks integrity. I can't be a part of this. But I didn't say anything. I just stewed about it for 3 days, 3 nights, didn't sleep, all the anxiety, until finally I didn't use any of the powerful phrases that we're talking about. I just blew my cork. And I blew up, said, I can't be a part of this. This lacks integrity. I don't want to do this. And why? Because I was just having this conversation in my own head. I wasn't pausing to say, what's possible? I wasn't pausing to say, well, how can we make this work? How could this be an integrity for me? What is the outcome? What is a successful outcome going to do? And all these assumptions. And so the first pause is for ourselves to say, okay, what's possible here? Why does what I have to say matter? What's at stake if I stay silent? And how's it going to feel when I'm heard? If I can pause and ask myself some of those questions, it gets me in a good frame of mind to start actually addressing the conversation in a positive way. And by the way, the CEO I expected to be fired did not fire me. Taught me a really valuable lesson. He said, David, I don't see it that way. He said, I think it's in integrity, but I don't want you to violate your conscience. And then he asked me the question I should have thought about from the beginning. How can we make this work for you? We have to do the event. How can we make it work for you? 15 seconds, I had an idea. And he said, sure, that sounds good. Let's do it. All that wasted time because I hadn't paused and asked myself what was possible. I just made all those assumptions. So that's the first pause, to have a conversation with ourselves.
Yeah, I find often, like, if I'm having a reaction for something, I've really probably inferred a lot to get to that conclusion. You know what I'm saying? I might not even have actual basis for it. I'm just, like, to your point, assuming, oh, it must be this. And I find personally, like, deconstructing that and say, like, well, what's truly the basis for it? Or am I actually just, is this house built on a sand of assumptions, can help kind of, to your point, in that initial pause, kind of let a little bit of that pressure out. What were you going to say, Karin?
Yeah. So the other thing I would add to that is, I think, so 55% of the people in our survey said that their advice to their former self would be that they would stay calm. Okay. So like that's more than half said that staying calm. So that's the power of the pause. But I think that part of where we get into trouble is, okay, so we screwed it up and we didn't pause. Right. And then how can we then stop and pause in the middle of the situation? And so example, the other day, right before the book came out, I have the situation where there's one of our big clients, and once a quarter I go in and I have office hours where people can just come in and talk about stuff that's happening and work through strategic issues or people issues or whatever we need, team issues. And this guy, he comes just storming into the room. And he's like, Karin, do you have a copy of that book? I saw David's signature. He sent me an email and there's a picture of this book. And I need that book. I need powerful phrases for dealing with workplace conflict. And he was just fired up. And I said, well, the book's not out yet, but I do know what it says. Right?
Yeah. And yes, you need it.
And so what's going on? And he was just his spitting teeth mad about how fired up he was about this other person who was his peer in another department. She doesn't care. She's out to get me. I said, you do know she wants exactly the same thing as you, right? Because I know, because she was just in my office, right? And he's like, no, she doesn't. So what we did was we created a pause. And I said, you're going to go ask her these couple questions. What would a successful outcome do for you? I gave him some goats. He came back that same day. He's like, oh my gosh, I have wasted 3 months of my life, being fired up. My wife is sick of hearing about it. I'm stressed. I'm not sleeping. I should have had this conversation a long time ago because they really did want the same thing. And they did, and they weren't trying to get out to get each other, but they needed a pause. And so that's what I think what hope your listeners would hear is if you didn't pause before, you still can pause, even if you're in a long-term conflict.
And even if you're right in the middle of the heated conversation, you can still pause and say, hey, you know what? I am not showing up like my best self right now, and I care too much about our relationship and the outcome and what we're trying to achieve here. I need to take a beat. And it's about you. You're not saying the other person's out of line or anything else. Just, this is where I am. I need to take a beat. And that's okay too. And that can be a really healthy phrase to use in those situations.
Does that work with wives?
Yes.
Great.
And husbands. And husbands.
And husbands. Very good. Okay. Yeah, just that pause, just to be able to kind of let some of that pressure out. And, back to what I was saying from before, it feels like 90% of these conflicts, it's due to some kind of a miscommunication. 90% of the time, it feels like, yeah, we do actually want the right thing, but I just misinterpreted something you said. And now I've spent the last 3 months, complaining to my wife about how evil my counterpart in the other department is. I mean, it's crazy. But so much of there's so much wasted potential in contribution and engagement that rests at the feet of these conflicts that are all usually kind of fixable,
So true. Yeah. It really is.
So I would love to talk a little bit about how, how do leaders end up messing this kind of stuff up? Peer to peer, we've spent a lot of time kind of talking about, and I think this intersection of conflict can happen person to person, employee to boss, employee to company. It can happen between any entity in this sort of network. What do you see, let's say when addressing an employee concern or addressing some kind of an ethical issue? I don't find most leaders are like that CEO that you just talked about, David, from your old job that are, ready to fix it immediately, open to it. I feel like a lot of, I guess my framework is, given that leaders have a disproportionate impact on the lives of the people that report to them, to the extent that those cultures are broken, call it, due to whatever you want, say too much conflict or whatever, or too much unhealthy conflict, then I would say that they disproportionately contribute to the existence of that because they haven't hammered it out or they haven't embedded the values or the ways of interacting that allow for, less of that to happen. So what do you think some of those ways that leaders show up around these types of issues kind of inadvertently contribute to, a culture, quote unquote, where, conflict can really bloom?
Yeah, there are 3 that come up for me. And Karin, I want to see what your perspective is on this too. For me, the 3 critical mistakes I see leaders make. 1 is avoid the conversation. 2 is overpower, shut down the conversation. So I'm not comfortable with it. So either I just ignore it or avoid it, don't have it, or I get overbearing and just shut it down. Those are the first 2. The third that I find so common and also so easy to address and so powerful when you do, it's a failure to recognize inherent conflicts. And what I mean by that is, let's say that we've got values that in our organization, and one of our values is life balance, and we care about our employees' health and so forth. But then we also have a value of go the extra mile for our customers. Those values, both super important, both critical parts of our culture, are going to be in conflict with each other. They have to be at some point. And what effective leaders do is they bring that conflict up and they talk about it and they explore it and they talk about their strategic stories of how I've dealt with that and how I navigate it. What does that look like for you? And then we get our people involved. So often, though, we forget about those natural conflicts. And that happens whether we're talking about mission values things, or it could be our strategic focus for the year. And how that trickles down and creates a conflict between engineering and our customer support people. And so now they're in conflict. It's a natural conflict. But if we ignore the existence of those conflicts as leaders and we don't have the conversations, they're only going to fester and they get worse. But we have such a strategic opportunity if we can surface them and talk about them. So those are the 3 for me.
I would totally agree with those 3. And I just want to add a little bit on to number 3. So the Ralph Kilman, who of the Thomas Kilman conflict assessment instrument, I asked him if I was allowed to call him this, and he said yes. I think he's the grandfather of conflict research. He's been at it for a very long time, and we interviewed him as we were writing the book, and he endorsed our book, and have deep respect for him. And he has a whole, most conflict is actually caused by the system, not by the humans in the system. And when I think about that, I was at Verizon for 2 decades and told you about my HR time, but I also led a retail sales channel. So I had a 2,200 person sales team. Well, here's an inherent conflict. And I didn't have the skills to deal with this back then. Instead, I was just really mad at my counterpart. But it was a systems conflict. So I had a retail store. And then they built, a company store, and then they built an indirect store, literally that shared a parking lot with my store. So different channel, different sales quotas, right? And then they would give them special promotions. And it was taking all of and then my team wasn't making quota, right? Well, yeah. I was so angry at at the indirect director. He was angry at me. We were always stepping on each other's toes. He's a nice guy. I'm pretty nice too. It had nothing to do with us. And but our boss was like, you two just need to get along.
Yeah, that's the answer. Okay. That's how I parent, right? By the way. So thank you for showing me the error in the ways. Yeah, you're right. That's not going to fix it, to your point.
Right. So that just to embellish what David was saying is also managers are overlooking the impact of the system. And do you need to fix the system, or are you asking people to try to get along and collaborate in a system that is incenting something different?
I love that. How did that work out? You just met him and you said, oh, he's actually a nice guy, or what?
No, it didn't work out very good.
Yeah, it sounds like it didn't.
We stayed in conflict.
Yeah, I'm not sure you found out he was a nice guy till 20 years later, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think they almost did it on purpose. They really wanted us competing because they thought that that would make us work even harder. It wasn't healthy. It was not healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, you're living in a system that in many cases is not created by you. You're subject to the, inherent conflicts of that system. And I love what you said, David, about a good leader being able to see inherent potential. Maybe you didn't say potential. I think you said see inherent conflicts that could exist. I have seen, and I just think talking about those early, to your point, adds so much value because you can give somebody a frame before the conflict even happens. This happens often between sales and implementation in our company. Implementation is these salespeople, they don't care about anything. And then, the salespeople are does implementation not understand that we have to sell? We have to get moving. And what I found is that as someone from sales shadows somebody in implementation or vice versa, they start to see oh my gosh, these are really well-intending people. They just have a different set of constraints on them. And I think when we as leaders can start to talk about, hey, there's a potential issue here, there's a potential that, implementation is going to look at us as not caring about anything or whatever, similar conversation on the other side, we can help give them some of the tools that can help avoid some of that conflict by helping them to understand and have the right frame around the fact that that group has the same mission as us to grow our company and fulfill the purpose of our organization. Look down and recognize that we're all wearing the same jersey. That can do a lot, I think, to help kind of pave over that conflict. Not pave over it, but hammer it out.
We're smiling because we have the same conflict in our company.
You do.
Every company. And I'm thinking, as you're talking of a very practical example, global HR executive that I was talking with 2-3 months ago, and the conflict she had was within the sales because there's the global sales team and then there's the local regional sales teams. And the global sales teams, in her language, great metaphor, they want to plant trees that in 30 years they're going to harvest fruit from. Well, the regional sales folks, they got to make their commission this quarter. And so they're like, give me the fruit right now. And those two objectives, obviously some natural systemic conflict between them. She saw it. She could see it. She knows what's going to happen. So she was bringing the teams together using one of our products, the Synergy Stack system, to help them have that conversation and navigate how are we going to, it can't be all way on one way. It can't be all the other. And it's not just compromise and everybody loses, but how can we strategically solve for this in a way that's going to work for everyone involved? And It's just a great example of what you're talking about.
That is a great example. Okay, so we're getting toward the end here. My last question is, how does an organization or a leader kind of marry these two books together? Like, how do they, like, what role do powerful phrases or the application and usage of these powerful phrases do to contribute to the courageous cultures that I think we're all trying to build?
Yeah. So I'll take a stab, then David, you can. So courageous cultures is really more for executives. It's how do you build teams of micro innovators, problem solvers, and customer advocates in very practical ways? How do you make it feel safe and easy and proactively inviting people into the conversation? And in that, we talk about this balance of, and we call it an elegant dance between, having real clarity and curiosity. And of course, the psychological safety is the connection, right? And then the moving commitment is how. So it's still, you've got all those dimensions at play, but in courageous cultures, we really focus on the clarity and curiosity dynamic. And in powerful phrases, it's more for the book for any human being, right? Whether or not it's not for necessarily just for executives, although trust me, executives need these skills. I spent a lot of time with executive teams, and it's not too basic. But if you are now empowering everyone with the words to show up with connection, to create clarity, to cultivate curiosity, to move to commitment, no matter where you sit on the organizational chart. Both are aligned in that they're very practical ways to do it. But it's like, so one is how do you create make it easier for people so they don't have to be so courageous.
Yep.
And then the other one is the powerful phrases for dealing with workplace conflict is how do you make it easier to be courageous? And because Dr. Amy Edmondson, pioneer of psychological safety, says, courage and psychological safety are two sides of the same coin. You need to create an environment of psychological safety, but you also need to empower people with practical ways to feel safe and empowered to share their ideas.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, one is sort of a top down, the other one is sort of a bottom up.
That's a simpler way to say it. Yeah.
Practical equipping. And there's just so many, the last thing I would add on that, there's just so many practical scenarios and ways to approach that. So in powerful phrases for dealing with workplace conflict, yeah, you get the how to deal with the bully at work and the know-it-alls and complainers, all that kind of thing. But you also get specific phrases if you've got a boss who's micromanaging, or your boss won't make a decision, or you're feeling overwhelmed and I have to say no. How do I say no in a productive, healthy, strategic way to my manager? So we've got, phrases to help with all of those kinds of situations, as well as some of the other types of things that we've been talking about.
My last question, I know I lied. My last question, if you were to divide conflict types into three groups of peer conflict, like manager conflict with boss, or conflict with company is a little more ethereal. It's like, I don't believe the values of the company or something like that. How do you think, what do you think the balance is across those three?
Well, we can answer
it's kind of an insane question, but
it's not insane. It's interesting. And we can answer it from the research because we we can answer it from the research of the question. When you think about one of the biggest conflicts you've ever had at work, all right? And if, just give everybody a chance to guess of those three, which one came out on top?
Okay.
99.9% it was with another human being. Now that did divide out I would say about 2/3 managers, 1/3 colleague.
Makes sense.
But it was always that interpersonal conflict. Rarely ever with the company as the abstract concept.
Yeah.
With my manager acting unfairly or my colleague treating me wrong.
Yeah, I think probably quote unquote conflicts with company, it's probably just like a slow burn that shows up as increased apathy or something. It's like when I join a company, I'm so excited, and this is a new adventure, and look at this amazing job post, and look at this amazing code of conduct, and you get into it, and it's never really that thing. And over time, I think that disengagement can often tie down to just not being, again, back to connection, not being connected to the company and not believing it.
Well, and the managers are the interpreters of the company policy. And, I've had to, over the years, really enforce some policies that I didn't even totally agree with, right? But it's the how do you communicate that? Do you I think this is stupid policy too. Well, now I hate the company. But if you've got a manager, right, who is helping, I get it's not ideal, but here's why this decision was made. That's why we've got to really train managers to be able to do that well.
Totally. Man, I love this conversation, you guys. Thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for all your work in this space. I just think like culture is the only sustainable competitive advantage. And it is like the biggest opportunity for companies right now to start putting some of these techniques and practices in place, because it just affects everything. It permeates every single interaction within the organization. And in this knowledge work economy where people are their work, the stuff that we're talking about is more important than ever. And frankly, I think a lot of talk around culture stays so high in the clouds. Everyone's like, yeah, absolutely. And then they leave and they're like, how do I do this? What's great about this book and your approach in both, again, I haven't read the second book yet, or the most recent book, but it's very practical techniques, tactics to start to turn the battleship and start to change the world in your little corner of it, So I just love it. I love your approach, love your energy. Thank you guys so much for coming on the Ethics Experts.
Oh, absolutely. Our pleasure. Thank you.